So I wake up and I check my world. Is the world okay? Yep. Am I okay? Yep. And then I go, hold it. I get to see my good friend Dewey Freeman in less than an hour. Dewey Freeman,
I
welcome.
love it. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
We
I
are the Elder Council.
counsel.
We get
And
up early.
I got up especially early this morning because we just got 2 feet of snow in the last 36 hours, and it takes a while to get up the hill to feed. So, and I'm thrilled to be here. As I look out my window, there's a 6-foot fence in one little area, and the snow is about 2 feet from the top of it. So we're sort of packed in here for a bit.
Now we're in the 9th year of a drought here, and we had 2 weeks, about 3 months ago, we had 2 weeks of rain, and that dumped inordinate amounts of snow up in the high Sierras, and our main water comes from there, but that doesn't make it down to my house. So we're just hoping for some rain here this weekend, being the first weekend of spring, which is it's awesome and amazing, and how time has flown so quickly.
Yes. And did that rain and snow come in since I've been to Santa Barbara, or was that before?
No, that was
before.
It was a while ago, and we had 10 days, and what happens here almost for the last 9-10 years is we get a bunch of it all at once, and then it's like, hope that holds, you guys. We'll see you next year.
Keep your buckets.
Yeah.
Keep the top off your bucket so we can fill them up.
Hang on to that. So today, I'm, as you know, just kind of bathed in story all the time. And around here, we talk about stories in the frame of those you tell, those you're told, and those you tell yourself. And I thought today, this has come up in a couple of different conversations this week about the stories we tell ourselves, and when we started telling them, or it was a story told to us that turned into a story we tell ourselves when we were very, very young, and we've lived under the falsity of that story. As we record this now, I know we like to keep things evergreen so you could listen to them at any time, but we are 3 weeks into the Ukrainian war, and the stories that are being told both to the Russian people, and the stories that are being told inside the country, and the stories that are being told to us. And so I thought we would look at the stories we tell ourselves. And as I say that, what do you think? What comes to mind?
Our brains are designed to keep us alive.
That's our show, ladies and gentlemen.
And I will say to you, and I say this to you often, and I say it on this show, is that is 1 minute ago, when we were talking about doing whatever we were going to do today, that thought did not go through my mind. And as you were speaking, that thought emerged. So let me speak to that when you were talking about the stories we tell ourselves. When I say our brains are designed for our own survival, part of what that means is that we tell ourselves stories so that we can survive, and so that we can make it through whatever we need to make it through.
So the story is part of the survival process.
Yes.
Okay, so I have to ask the question, is that if the brain is designed to protect us, even if we're being fucking reckless and we're doing whatever we can to fuck everything up, the brain is still, it's kind of like one of those tops that you spin, no matter how much you hit it, that top is designed to get upright. So are you saying, Doc, that
Exactly.
no matter what what my conscious brain tries to do to fuck it up, being an asshole, doing drugs, making bad decisions, my brain is still going to try to go, "No, I got to keep this fucker alive."
Well, exactly. So, and here's what what I mean by that. Let's say we just fucked something up and we're doing drugs, or we're drinking a 6-pack a night. There's some part of us that is going, I need that 6-pack to make it through. I need that 6-pack to unwind from the day. I don't know what I would do without that. Or many times the stories we tell ourselves they're not stories that always enhance our lives. They're stories that we tell ourselves to survive, to get through. Sometimes that's an habitual process. For instance, we may set ourselves up to struggle all the time because we have some story inside that our lives aren't worthwhile unless we're struggling.
I want to probe right there for just a second, because a conversation came up this week that I don't have a way to relate to, and it's about people who self-sabotage. And it sounds like there's a story they're telling themselves that and they do this on a consistent enough basis that they're consistently sabotaging. I'm not that guy, and I don't even know how to relate to that. Help me understand that, and maybe how prevalent that is.
Well, it's true that you're not that guy. I've seen that. I mean, you live by a very different set of stories, which I deeply appreciate. And if I'm telling myself the story that I don't deserve something, like I'm totally making this up, so you know, and everyone knows. If I would tell myself the story that I don't deserve the kind of friendship that I have with you, then instead of coming to you and going, "Wow, Mark, I'm really struggling. I don't know that I deserve this, your kindness and your love and your support." Instead of doing that, I very likely could do something to sabotage our relationship. I could not show
Is that
up.
conscious?
Yes and no. So let me talk about that. There's a difference. And out there in the world, there's a lot of talk about subconscious and unconscious. To me, and many times they're the same. They're at least spoken about as being the same. And truth be known, an argument could be made that they are. The difference for me is unconscious has to do with something that we don't really have access to. That it's fully unconscious. It's something's operating within our system that we don't really have. You know, we go, "I don't know why I did that. I don't know what I'm feeling." Where subconscious is, it's like under the surface, and we still have access to that if we allow ourselves the time and awareness to go there.
So stay right there, because I see there being a vast difference between the two.
Totally.
And so it was interesting to hear you say, and so that's a topic of debate, I'm sure, with the people who talk of such things. We've talked, and I talk all the time about unconscious competence and unconscious incompetence. We've done a show on it. It's something that
Totally.
I see that and I see it in myself and I see it in others, and I go,
Mhm,
I'm
mhm.
looking at that. And so unconscious to me means I'm not aware of it. I'm just doing it. I'm not aware that I don't know the thing. I just don't even know. I'm just going through not knowing, or I'm going through, my body knows what to do. My dendrites are all aligned. Thank you, doctor, for teaching me about dendrites. I spent the week studying them. Um, Whereas subconscious, to your point, that we've talked about this as well, is that if we take the whole brain with our 500 billion neurons that are in it, and we're accessing some small amount of it, and that's a debatable amount, 10, 15, 20%. And then there's all this part that we know is there, we just can't, we don't have the capacity or whatever to get to it. So that's below it. I'm under the impression that that's kind of the back of the house, if you will. That's the back of the house. It's doing all the work, taking care of all the business. And I have
Yes.
100,000% confidence in my subconscious ability to make sure I'm breathing, make sure I mean, it's your point. That's the part of the brain that is making sure all systems are go when they're not working on
Yes.
it. And I don't need to know about that.
So that's in part what I'm saying. So this is going to be, I'm going to go into a little bit, this will be sort of fluid. When I talk about unconscious incompetence, or we talk about that, it's like we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
When we move to competent,
Conscious competence.
conscious incompetent, thank you, that's where we begin to go, where in my world I would switch to, it's really subconscious incompetence. Because what we're saying is we know we don't know a lot.
Right.
We go, okay, I'm aware that there's something under here, so I'm gonna be curious about it. And I'm actually aware that I'm incompetent versus the person who's not aware that they're incompetent.
Correct.
Where it's like we have an awareness that we don't know something. We have an awareness that there's something under there. The other one is, yeah, we don't even have an awareness of
Oblivious. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of that gets semantical. One of the pieces that, going back to the storytelling, is the way in my world to walk back and go, is this story real? Is actually asking ourselves if whatever stories we're telling ourselves, are they true?
So that gets to the nub of each one of the conversations this week. When you figure, like, as an external person helping someone else, it's like, oh, hold it, that's not true. Oh, that's a story they're telling themselves that they think is
Yes.
true.
Yes.
So then you help them become consciously aware, like, oh,
Yeah.
hey
Consciously
brother,
incompetent. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Hey brother, tell me about that. Well, I was and then you'd ask
Yeah.
the question, is that true? Well, I mean, I believe it. Doesn't mean it's true just because you believe it.
Right. So there's two questions, and these questions come from a person named Byron Katie who works with people. Her questions are, is it true? And if you are still saying, well, I don't know, the next question is, can you prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that that's true?
So why don't you give us an example?
An example would be, um, well, this is a real life example. And yeah, part of this I'm making up. Last couple of evenings, my Kimberly's, one evening she spent with one of her women friends. It was funny. They were going to have a 5-minute chat on the phone, and it turned into a 3.5-hour chat. And last night she went down to help set up. There's a conference in the Denver Boulder area on wilderness survival, and she went down to help. She teaches part of that through a survival school here in Colorado. And I thought she was going to be home maybe at 6:30 or 7, and it was like 9:30 or 9:45 when she called me on her way home. And I wasn't worried that she was doing anything untoward. I was just going, is she okay? Is
she okay? Right.
Yeah. And so I could have made up a story that she didn't want to be with me, that, 2 nights ago, she spent the night with talking to her friend, or the evening. And then last night she was gone way longer than I thought she was going to be. I'm like, what's up? And that's a story I could make up. And I could probably go that route long enough to where I could convince myself that she just didn't want to be with me the last 2 nights or evenings. I could do that. If I was doing that, I would say, is that true?
Hmm.
And one way I could actually find out is ask her. Or I could assume it was true and treat her that way when she walked in the door. Or even before she walked in the door, I could say, is that true? Can I prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that that's true? And the answer would be an obvious no. Well, the next question is when I'm making up those stories, how does it affect me? If I make up the story that that's true, and then
So
the other,
no,
go
just a
ahead.
second. So back to the initial premise that our brain is designed to keep us alive. Your brain crafted that story to protect you from being hurt from her, whatever you thought she was doing. Did I get that right, Doc?
Correct.
Got it.
Now, for you and everyone else, I'm giving this as an
So
example.
fully,
That's not what I fully
Understood.
feel.
Understood.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I've had abandonment in my life. I've had, in fact, I would be happy and sort of want to share a story of an event that happened this last week. But I've had women leave me. I've had, women not be honest with me. I've had, and so I could combine all that stuff. I could take all that stuff and go, boom.
Yeah.
And go, yep, there's one more.
So you just, that's what we call emotional baggage. that shit you bring in. How, okay, so because we all have had that and have had some shit that when you tell someone, you're like, no, that didn't happen. Like, yeah, kind of happened exactly like that.
Kind of happened exactly
that's
like
not
that.
what the fuck. Were you sleeping, or were you did not see anything? And you're young and dumb, and you don't see the signs and that kind of stuff. And so then as soon as you see a little inkling of something, your radar lights up, right?
Mm-hmm. So let me actually, can we back up,
Please?
12.5 seconds. When you said we're young and dumb and don't see anything, the chances are when you look back, you did see it. You just told yourself the story that what you saw wasn't true.
Oh, okay.
Maybe because you were really into somebody, or maybe because, so if I'm talking about relationships with women, maybe because they're like incredibly beautiful and sexy. And it's like, I mean, I don't know very many men who are with some young, beautiful, sexy woman that they get drawn in, and it's like, it's like, okay, but maybe they're lying to us about something over here, but we just tell ourselves the story that that's okay because we have beauty and sex in front of us, or those kind of things. And
So, so how this asking the question, is it true, presumes you're self-aware enough to know you're in the middle of a story right now, dude. And
mm,
I'm guessing just in general terms, we're not aware of the stories we're telling ourselves.
we're not, I would agree with that. And we're particularly not aware of the truth of all of the stories that we're telling ourselves. Many times people will come into my office and go, yeah, I'm telling myself this story, and I believe it.
Thank you. Session's over. Just leave your money
Yeah,
at the door. See you
yeah,
next week.
exactly. And my job is to actually stop and go, is it true? And most people go, well, yeah. And then that's where the second part comes in, which is really powerful. It's like, can you prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that that's true? And the answer is like, well, no,
So
I can't.
I just had this little picture in my brain of my id and my ego in court in my brain,
Exactly.
trying to convince the
Hello,
jury.
this is true. Yes,
Well,
exactly.
yeah, no, convince a jury. Now I have a jury of my peers. Yeah, but Your Honor, she didn't come home till 9:15, and yes, but objection, Your Honor. She frequently comes home at 9:15. Yes, but Your Honor, this time. So I could see. I love this visually. We all now have a picture in our brain because we've watched enough Law and Order to know that the burden of proof is very high. So now you're saying prove without a reasonable doubt that in fact that story is true. So here's the question.
Yep.
Can you admit, and when you admit the story is not true?
Can say that again, because that hits home.
Once you've asked the question, can you live with the answer?
Yes. Can you tell the truth to yourself?
Yeah. Wow. Let's marinate on that one for a second. I will be candid to say, sometimes I'll ignore the truth.
Yes.
Yep, that's what's happening. Fucking, I'm doing it anyway.
We have, what's interesting about that is we have that choice. That's one of the interesting things about humans. We have the choice to go, yep, I gonna lie to myself and do blank anyway. And,
Eyes wide open.
Yep. Eyes wide open. Or what we do oftentimes is we make up series of stories we know story A is, if we ask ourselves truthfully, is it true, or can I prove it's true? And we go, no, but then we make up a second story to prove the first one, even though we know it's not true. Then we can make up a third story, and we end up linking stories. Again,
it's called job security for you, right?
Well, actually, for both of us, because what you guys are teaching is how to tell stories. Well, you're teaching how to tell true stories.
You know what's interesting in that, and to that point, because we are very much nonfiction storytellers.
Mhm.
We don't allow, someone will say, well, yeah, but that it didn't exactly happen like that. But I want to go with that. And I'm like, yeah, no,
No. Yeah,
no,
exactly.
you don't get to do that. You find a different story, or find a different way in, or do something. So in the story we tell ourselves, I wonder if it still has that structure of what was the setting, what was the snap that got you, that started that story off, what was the struggle of that story, what was the external. So here's what happens. Here's I think I broke the code, is at least on the negative stories we tell ourselves, we have set up a story where struggle exists ad infinitum,
And that's where we sabotage ourselves.
right? Whatever that is, that story it never gets out of the struggle stage of a story. In
Mhm.
our world, there's either an internal voice or an external voice that says something, or makes you aware of new information, or gives you a different lens to look at when you go, oh, and okay, huh. And it becomes the end of the struggle. It's the bookend. The
Right.
snap
We
is the
never get
beginning.
that shift out of
The
that.
shift never happens, because then what the shift leads to the lesson that you learned. It's like, oh fuck, man, I was stuck in that story for 35 years.
Yes.
Don't trusting women, or kids are gonna, whatever the thing is, or women can't accede to the top, right?
Hmm.
That is
Hmm.
totally a story, because there's
Hmm.
plenty of awesome women who are at the top. um, so I'm not discounting the fact that there is societal pressure to keep them down, but however, there's plenty of, I mean, if you want to look, there's plenty of great examples of women who haven't figured it out, and they're at the top of it.
You bet. So here's one of the pieces that I mean, speaking about women who are at the top, is you're Kimberly. I mean, she is at the top of her game and she is amazing. And one of the biggest pieces that in my learning with you and her around storytelling is, and Kimberly probably said this over the 3-day period that we were in Santa Barbara together, maybe 15 to 20 times, is that our stories are what creates trust.
Yep.
And if we're telling stories that we have embellished, if we're telling stories that are only partially true, trust cannot be created.
Correct. Though you may try to tell yourself that they are,
Yes.
when they don't work, you're like, oh, why didn't that work? Well, because it wasn't true.
Right. So if I'm telling you or our audience or in a TED talk or a story that's not true, that will eventually be found out.
Let's
Yeah.
let's fine tune that a little bit
Okay.
and go back to the word embellish, because in the story on a whole is true, but it was embellished a little bit for one reason or another, and then the next time you told the story was maybe a little over here, a little over there. So in general, and the reason I'm telling you this is, that life lesson slapped me in the face when I was 17, 18, slapped me right upside the head. And I was in the Jesus Freak movement, here in Southern California. And we ran a Christian coffee house on Van Nuys Boulevard. It was like a ministry. And I was the long hair hippie. where there was a group of us called the family, and we had all the stories of, life gone wrong, and we find Jesus, and now everything's going to be great, which was true. And I would speak to, on occasion, several times, to the Baptist youth group on Sunday nights before Sunday church. There'd be 400 or 500 kids, and I would speak, right? And I've loved public speaking since I was 8. I mean, in 8th grade, not since I was 8, since I was in 8th grade. I had my first taste of it. And about, I don't know, maybe 2 months into that, my buddy Rick says, "So what part of your story is true?" What? Oh, I've heard you tell this story, I don't know, a dozen times. Well, it's different every time.
Mhm.
Oh, which part? I mean, did this happen, or did that happen, or did this? Was it? Come on, what's the truth? And it was at a time where that just hit me right in the heart. And ever since then, okay, no need to
Yeah.
embellish it. Story's the story. The story's the story. Don't need to embellish. And I'm glad I learned that young.
Mhm. Well, and all of what you're talking about is trust. Can we trust that our real stories will actually touch somebody?
That's different.
And
So that's a
well,
belief, right?
mhm. Well, we might be telling ourselves a story that if I just tell you my story straight up, that it's not enough.
I've got to
That's
raise the stakes on it. Then there was a tiger at the door.
right. There's and
And the
and
blade just missed me.
yeah. And it's like sometimes you can have fun with that. When I injured my thumb, you, Traver, and me, and a few other people had fun making up shit about how to happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, we had
It
great
was a
stories.
manta ray that bit it off last I heard.
Yeah, it was right
We're
after I
diving off a
chased.
Tora Tora.
Yeah, after I chased the white shark off that was going to eat the manta ray. And it's like
You don't
we can
trust the
play.
truth. Oh.
Yeah, but it's like,
Hmm.
but I can tell you the story about how the absolute, to the most detailed way that I can absolutely remember it, how I lost my thumb. And it's a heavy duty story. I don't have to make something up. And swinging all the way back around to the stories that we tell are nonfiction, is if we're embellishing something, someone is going to ask, like your friend asked, what part's true? But the other part is that if we embellish the stories for ourselves, we will end up asking ourselves what's true. We'll end up not trusting ourselves. And the other piece is what will also happen is in whatever stories we tell, we'll forget. So if you tell it years and years ago, I don't even know where I heard this. If you don't ever lie, you never have to remember what you said. So, I could make up a story or I can embellish a story, but then that part that I embellished, there's some part inside me that goes, yeah, that's not true, even as I'm telling it. And we end up not trusting ourselves, and we end up not trusting the other person. And to Kimberly Wild's point is that our stories create trust. And those stories have to be true to create trust, both in ourselves and in others.
Which is why on the surface, storytelling seems so easy to do. And as soon as you peel back one layer, it's like, oh man, it is really, really challenging, because when you're putting that story together, or even thinking about the story you tell yourself, and you strip away embellishment, you strip all that, he says, well, how is it interesting? That's a different, because what you're saying by I need to make it more interesting so you'll care. So I'll get, so
Yes.
I will influence you in some way. So I need to make it more interesting because the truth wasn't interesting. So I need to make it more interesting. So I would purport either find a different story that's interesting, or spend the time, and this is where the work comes in, to figure out what was interesting about that. And if the story didn't have a struggle in it, or there wasn't that shift, there wasn't that lesson, there wasn't some outcome from that, then it was, don't tell the story. It's not interesting. It's just a list of facts. It's an accounting of
Mhm,
things.
mhm.
There's no purpose to that. Where if the story that you tell yourself, like a good story you would tell yourself, is like, man, this thing happened, then boom, this happened, then I struggled through all this stuff, but then I read a book, or then I saw a thing, or then I listened to a podcast, and boy, it set myself right, and bam. And therein I did the work to understand the story, and through that true telling of it to myself. And then frequently what happens on this show is this comes up during the week for me, and then I tell you a story on Saturday,
Mhm,
and it's
mhm.
interesting, and it could be the most little tiny piece slice of life, but once you've figured out all those pieces, it becomes interesting, because um, you're interesting.
Exactly. And when, well, the phrase that's running, I was going to say something else and wasn't coming together. The phrase that's coming is, the truth is interesting.
Yeah.
And even in some small minor thing that has happened, because we don't really know the impact that our stories are going to have on somebody else.
100%.
And
But know that they do.
yes, and when the stories that we tell ourselves, if those stories are not true, the result is of lack of trust of ourselves, is a very similar kind of process than if I tell you a story that's not true, and eventually you go, oh, well, that didn't make sense. Dewey said he
That
was,
didn't square, right?
yeah, Dewey said he was blank blank, and some other person said he was in another state. And it's like, huh. So our the stories that we tell ourselves need to be true. And the impact of that truth is what will change our lives and change our relationships.
Bingo. My friend, it's always great talking to you. I love these lessons.